In the heart of Kai Province, nestled amidst rolling green valleys and ancient forests shrouded in mist, lay a small village untouched by the ambitions of warlords and the chaos of Japan's Sengo period. It was a tranquil place where time seemed to slow, and life revolved around the simple rhythms of planting rice, tending livestock, and sharing stories by the fire. The villagers lived humble lives, finding joy in the small pleasures, a bountiful harvest, the first blooms of cherry blossoms in spring, or the gentle patter of summer rain. Yet, in this seemingly unremarkable village, fate had planted the seeds of a legend. Hiroshi was born to Takashi, the village blacksmith, and Akira, a woman known for her sharp wit and compassionate heart. Takashi was a man of few words, but immense skill, shaping not only tools and plows, but also weapons that could rival the craftsmanship of any daimyo's armory. What the villagers didn't know was that Takashi had once been a samurai. Years earlier, he had served a powerful lord in a distant province, his blade carving a path through the chaos of war. But the life of a warrior had taken everything from him, his family, his comrades, and the very sense of honor that had once defined him. Disillusioned and weary, he had abandoned his armor and wandered until he found this peaceful village, a place where he could bury his past and start anew. From the moment Hiroshi could walk, he was drawn to his father's forge. The glow of molten iron, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil, and the sharp tang of metal in the air fascinated him. Takashi noticed the boy's keen interest and began teaching him the basics of blacksmithing, but it was clear that Hiroshi's passion lay elsewhere. When he wasn't helping his father, Hiroshi could be found whittling sticks into makeshift swords and practicing strikes against the tall grass in the fields. His movements were fluid, almost instinctual, and his eyes burned with a determination far beyond his years. Akira often teased her husband about their son's boundless energy and curiosity. "He has your eyes, Takashi," she would say, "but there's something more in him, a fire that even you didn't have at his age." Takashi would smile faintly at her words, but deep down, he felt a pang of unease. He recognized the same fire that had once driven him into battle, and he knew the dangers it could bring. As Hiroshi grew older, Takashi began to share fragments of his past, weaving lessons into their daily lives. "A sword is not just a weapon," he told his son one evening as they worked side by side in the forge. "It is a reflection of the soul. Treat it with respect, and it will guide you. Abuse it, and it will destroy you." Hiroshi listened intently, soaking in every word. Though he didn't fully understand his father's wisdom at the time, those lessons would stay with him, shaping the man he would become. The village was a sanctuary of peace, but the world beyond its borders was anything but. News of battles and shifting alliances between powerful warlords occasionally reached the villagers, carried by traveling merchants or wandering monks. Takashi did his best to shield Hiroshi from these stories, but the boy's curiosity was insatiable. He wanted to know everything about the samurai, the code of Bushido, and the great battles that shaped the land. "Why did you stop being a samurai?" Hiroshi asked one day, his eyes filled with wonder and confusion. Takashi paused, the weight of the question heavy in the air. "Because I learned that war is not the answer to everything," he replied. "Strength is not measured by how many battles you win, but by how you choose to use it. Remember that, Hiroshi." For a time, life in the village remained calm, and Hiroshi's days were filled with training, chores, and dreams of adventure. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One fateful night, the village's fragile peace was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats and the flicker of torches on the horizon. Bandits, loyal to a warlord seeking to expand his influence, descended upon the village. They tore through homes, taking what they pleased and leaving destruction in their wake. Takashi fought valiantly to defend his family, wielding a blade for the first time in years. But the odds were overwhelming. As the bandits set fire to the forge, Takashi fell, his blood soaking the earth he had called home for so long. With his dying breath, he turned to Hiroshi and said, "Honor your sword, and it will honor you. Protect those who cannot protect themselves." The loss of his father changed Hiroshi forever. Grief burned in his heart, but it was tempered by resolve. He vowed never to let others suffer as his village had. Gathering what little he could carry, he set out into the world, leaving behind the ashes of his past. Though still young, Hiroshi carried with him the lessons his father had taught him, and a new name began to form in the whispers of those who met him, Arashi, the storm that would one day shake the land. The path of the storm. Hiroshi's journey began with nothing but his father's battered sword, a satchel of rice, and the determination to make sense of his newfound purpose. The road was long and treacherous, winding through dense forests, treacherous mountain passes, and villages scarred by war. He quickly learned that the world beyond his home was harsh and unforgiving. Bandits, mercenaries, and even samurai without masters, ronin, roamed the countryside, preying on the weak and desperate. Hiroshi's first test came sooner than he expected. While passing through a small village on the edge of a river, he stumbled upon a group of ronin extorting the villagers for food and coin. The villagers, gaunt and hollow-eyed from famine, pleaded for mercy, but the ronin's laughter echoed coldly through the air. Hiroshi, barely more than a boy, felt his heart race. He was no seasoned warrior, but the memory of his father's sacrifice burned in his mind. Clutching the sword that had once belonged to Takashi, Hiroshi stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "What kind of samurai prey on the helpless?" he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. The ronin turned, their faces twisting in amusement at the sight of the young stranger. "And what are you going to do about it, boy?" sneered the leader, a towering man with a scar running down his face. Hiroshi said nothing, but his grip tightened on the hilt of his sword. The fight that followed was short but brutal. Hiroshi's movements were raw and unpolished, guided more by instinct than training. Yet, he was swift and unrelenting, like a storm breaking over the river. When the dust settled, the ronin lay defeated, and the villagers stared in awe at the young man who had risked his life for them. They offered him food and shelter, but Hiroshi declined, continuing his journey with only the gratitude of the villagers and the faint realization that he was capable of something greater. As the months passed, Hiroshi wandered from village to village, seeking knowledge and honing his skills. His encounters shaped him in ways he never expected. He met farmers who taught him the value of patience, monks who spoke of balance and inner peace, and veterans who shared hard-won lessons about war and survival. But the turning point came when he crossed paths with a man known throughout the region as Master Takeda Kojiro, a retired samurai whose reputation as a warrior and strategist was rivaled only by his mysterious withdrawal from the world. Kojiro had secluded himself in a hidden mountain temple, living a life of quiet reflection far from the conflicts that tore the country apart. Hiroshi had heard whispers of the master and sought him out, climbing treacherous paths and braving the biting winds of the highlands. When he finally arrived at the temple, Kojiro was waiting, seated calmly beneath an ancient cedar tree. "What brings you here, young one?" Kojiro asked, his voice steady and measured. "I seek to learn," Hiroshi replied, bowing deeply. "I wish to become stronger, not for power, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Kojiro studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Strength is not just in the sword, but in the mind and the spirit. If you are willing to endure the storm, I will teach you." Thus began the most grueling chapter of Hiroshi's life. Under Kojiro's guidance, he trained relentlessly, mastering the art of the sword as well as the deeper philosophies of Bushido. Kojiro's methods were unorthodox. He would send Hiroshi to meditate under freezing waterfalls, force him to spar blindfolded, and test his resolve by making him carry heavy stones up the mountain for hours. Through it all, Hiroshi's body grew stronger, his reflexes sharper, and his spirit calmer. But Kojiro's greatest lesson was not about combat, it was about choice. "You move like the wind, Hiroshi," Kojiro said one evening as they sat by a fire. "Fast, unpredictable, and relentless. But a storm can bring both destruction and renewal. The question you must ask yourself is this: what will you leave in your wake?" This question haunted Hiroshi as he trained. He realized that strength alone would not define him, it was how he used that strength that mattered. It was during this time that Kojiro gave him a new name, Arashi, meaning storm. It was a name that symbolized both his fighting style and the duality of his path. By the time Arashi left the mountain temple, he was no longer the inexperienced boy who had set out from his village. He was a samurai in spirit, if not in title, armed not only with a blade, but with a newfound clarity of purpose. He would go on to serve one of the most powerful clans in Japan, carving his name into the annals of history. But even as he rose to greatness, Kojiro's words remained with him, a reminder of the delicate balance between power and responsibility. Arashi had become the storm, but it was up to him to decide what kind of storm he would be. The turning point Arash's name quickly spread across the lands, and with it came the call to arms. It wasn't long before he was noticed by Takeda Shingen, one of the most powerful and respected warlords in Japan, who was building an army capable of uniting the fractured provinces. Shingen's eyes were sharp, and he understood that the most valuable warriors were those who fought not for gold or status, but for something deeper, a cause. Arashi, now fully committed to his path as a samurai, had seen the horrors of war, and though he held his blade with honor, he wasn't blind to the bloodshed it caused. His participation in battle was not motivated by the thirst for conquest, but by a desire to protect the innocent and uphold justice. So, when Takeda Shingen extended an invitation to join his ranks, Arashi accepted, partly out of respect for the warlord's vision, and partly because he believed that through Shingen's leadership, the land could be unified and the suffering of the common people brought to an end. At first, Arashi's presence in Shingen's army was met with skepticism. Many of the veteran samurai viewed him with suspicion, an outsider, a man without a noble title, and a wandering warrior who had not yet earned his place in the world. But Arashi's skill with a blade soon silenced their doubts. His swift strikes, unwavering courage, and tactical brilliance in battle made him a force to be reckoned with. The turning point came at the Battle of Kawanikajima, one of the most legendary confrontations of the Sengo period. Shingen's army was pitted against Usuji Kenshin's, a rival warlord whose own military prowess was legendary. The battlefield was thick with the tension of two great forces preparing to clash, and the outcome would determine the fate of the region. Both armies were well matched, and as the battle raged on, it became clear that neither side would yield easily. In the thick of the fighting, Arashi found himself at the heart of the conflict. He had been tasked with holding a narrow mountain pass, a strategic position that would either secure victory or lead to defeat. The Usuji forces, led by their own fierce general, charged forward in waves, seeking to break through and turn the tide of the battle in their favor. Arashi, his armor glistening under the afternoon sun, stood firm with his sword raised high for hours. He fought without respite, each strike a symphony of precision and speed. His body moved with an unnatural grace, as if he were one with the wind itself. He cut down enemy soldiers with fluid motions, his blade flashing like a silver streak in the midst of the chaos. The Usuji soldiers, initially confident, began to falter under the intensity of his assault. Whispers spread among their ranks, "There is a demon on the battlefield." But Arashi remained focused, his mind clear, and his purpose unwavering. When the Usuji forces launched their final push to overwhelm the pass, Arashi stood alone against their commander, a towering warrior whose reputation for invincibility was known far and wide. The clash between them was nothing short of epic. The two warriors locked blades in a flurry of strikes, their swords ringing with each blow. Arashi's speed was his greatest asset, but the Usuji general was a seasoned fighter, his strength undeniable. But it was in the heat of this final confrontation that Arashi's true strength shone through, not in his physical prowess, but in his resolve. As the battle swirled around them, he remembered the lessons of his past: honor your sword, and it will honor you. Arashi's focus sharpened as the world seemed to slow. He could see his opponent's movements before they even occurred, his every strike calculated and precise. Finally, with a swift and powerful motion, Arashi disarmed the Usuji general, sending him sprawling to the ground in defeat. The Usuji forces, demoralized by the loss of their commander and the fierce resistance of Arashi and his comrades, retreated. Shingen's army emerged victorious, but the cost of the battle was great. Many lives were lost, and even Arashi himself had been wounded in the fray. His injuries were severe, and as he lay on the battlefield, the reality of the violence he had just participated in began to settle in. Though his actions had helped secure victory, Arashi felt a deep sense of unease. He had fought with honor, but the destruction and loss of life weighed heavily on him. "What have I become?" he asked himself, as the cries of the wounded echoed in his ears. It was in that moment that the full weight of his responsibility as a warrior began to take shape. Takeda Shingen, noticing the young samurai's internal struggle, approached him. "You fought with the heart of a lion, Arashi," he said, his voice filled with respect. "But remember, a warrior must never lose sight of the reasons he fights. Victory is hollow if it comes at the cost of your soul." Arashi bowed his head, deeply humbled. The battle may have been won, but he knew that this was only the beginning of a much greater journey. His path as a samurai was not defined by the battles he fought, but by the choices he made along the way. He vowed to honor those choices, to protect those who could not protect themselves, and to ensure that his actions would leave a legacy of peace, not just war. It was this moment, the turning point in Arash's life, that would shape him into not just a fierce warrior, but a hero whose name would be etched into the legends of Japan for centuries to come. The betrayal and redemption. Arash's rise through the ranks of Takeda Shingen's army was meteoric. His reputation as a fierce and honorable warrior spread far and wide, and the warlord took notice. Shingen, impressed with Arash's skill and determination, appointed him as a captain, entrusting him with the leadership of a small but elite unit of samurai. It was a position of great responsibility, and Arashi carried it with pride. But as time passed, the undercurrents of politics and ambition began to stir within the Takeda clan. The realm of war was one of ever-shifting alliances and betrayals, where the line between loyalty and treachery was often blurred. Arashi, though a loyal servant to his lord, had not yet learned the full depth of the treachery that lurked in the shadows of the samurai courts. He was focused on the battlefield and the honor of his sword, believing that his actions in battle would determine the future of the land. It was during a time of great uncertainty, when Takeda Shingen sought to expand his influence over neighboring provinces, that a plot against the warlord began to take shape. One of Shingen's most trusted generals, Kuroda Tetsuo, harbored ambitions of his own. Kuroda was a brilliant strategist, known for his cunning and political maneuvering, and he had long coveted the power that came with Shingen's throne. He saw in Arashi a potential obstacle to his ascent, someone whose reputation for honor and strength might one day overshadow his own. Kuroda, using his influence over a faction of discontented samurai, devised a plan to bring down Shingen and, by extension, Arashi. He secretly forged letters purporting to be from Arashi, offering his loyalty to a rival warlord. These letters were carefully planted in the hands of Shingen spies, who, without hesitation, passed them along to the warlord himself. The message was clear: Arashi had betrayed him. When Takeda Shingen received the forged letters, the news shook him to his core. He had trusted Arashi as a son, had placed him in positions of power, and had seen in him the future of his clan. The thought of betrayal was unbearable. But in the world of war, trust was fragile, and even the smallest doubt could lead to ruin. Shingen, though devastated by the accusation, had no choice but to summon Arashi before him. The tension in the air was palpable as Arashi, unaware of the plot against him, stood before Shingen in the warlord's tent. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows on the walls, and the silence was thick with anticipation. Shingen's face was inscrutable, his eyes cold as he gestured to the letters in his hand. Arashi, Shingen began, his voice heavy with both disappointment and suspicion, "You have served me with honor, but now I must ask you, have you turned your back on me?" Arashi's heart sank as he saw the letters, the damning evidence of his supposed betrayal. "My lord," he said, his voice steady but filled with confusion, "I do not know what this is. I have never written such words. My loyalty to you is unwavering. I have never once strayed from the path of honor." But the warlord's expression remained unchanged. "The evidence is clear. A traitor has no place in my army, no matter how great their service has been." Arash's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. He knew that the letter was a forgery, but how could he prove it? He had no way of knowing who had orchestrated such a vile scheme. And worse, he knew that once Shingen made up his mind, there was little hope of redemption. In that moment, something shifted within Arashi. He realized that honor was not something that could simply be given or taken, it was something that had to be proven, through actions, not words. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees before Shingen, bowing deeply. "If you believe me to be a traitor, then I will accept my fate," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "But if I am to die for something I did not do, then let my death be a final act of loyalty." Shingen's gaze softened for a moment, but the decision had already been made. "You will be exiled from the Takeda clan," he declared, his voice tinged with sorrow. "If you are truly innocent, time will reveal the truth. But until then, you are no longer one of my samurai." Arashi stood, his heart heavy with grief, but his resolve unbroken. He understood that his path had been altered in ways he could not control. The honor he had fought so hard to maintain had been stripped from him by forces beyond his comprehension. Yet, he knew that he could not allow this moment of betrayal to define him. With a final bow to his former lord, Arashi left the Takeda clan, wandering the land as an outcast. He knew that redemption could not be earned overnight. It would take years, if not a lifetime, to restore his name and prove his loyalty. As the years passed, Arashi wandered through war-torn villages and across battlefields, always searching for a way to make things right. He became a mercenary, selling his blade to the highest bidder, but never forgetting the honor that had once defined him. Each battle, each skirmish, was an opportunity to reaffirm his commitment to the path of righteousness. He would no longer fight for the glory of a lord or the title of a samurai, but for the people who needed protection, for those whose voices were drowned out by the violence of war. It was during this time that Arashi learned the most valuable lesson of all, that redemption was not something granted by others, but something that had to be earned through the course of one's actions. He was no longer the man who sought honor through titles or recognition, but a warrior who found meaning in his choices, in the lives he saved, and in the legacy he would leave behind. Eventually, the truth of the betrayal was revealed. Kuroda Tetsuo's plot was uncovered, and Shingen, though devastated by the treachery of one of his closest allies, realized the grave mistake he had made in exiling Arashi. He sent emissaries to find the wandering samurai, offering him a chance to return to the Takeda clan, but Arashi had already found his true purpose. He had redeemed himself, not through the forgiveness of others, but through the man he had become. He was no longer just a samurai, he was a legend in his own right, a storm that had weathered the worst of betrayals and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever before. And so, Arashi continued his journey, not as a servant to any lord, but as a protector of the people, a symbol of hope in a world torn apart by war. The storm had passed, but its legacy would endure for generations to come.